Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Alumni Christmas celebration. In this Advent season of gratitude, I want to thank you for sharing this time with us today. And I know we all miss packing the ballroom to enjoy a lovely Christmas lunch. I can't tell you how many of you have told me that this tradition marks the beginning of your Christmas season, and we love celebrating it together. For Tommies, love being together, whether it is celebrating the beginning of the Christmas season, worshiping together, lending a hand to one another, cheering on our team, opening a door for one another, or simply enjoying each other's company. So Tommies, I can't wait to be together again with you in 2021. Meanwhile, I am so thankful that we can gather together virtually today to hear from Timothy Schmalz, artist and sculptor, directly from his studio in Canada. And of course, it would not be a St. Thomas Christmas celebration without the music of our very talented students. And now I would like to invite Father Larry Snyder, Vice President for Mission, to lead us in prayer. Father Snyder.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Let us pray. We give you thanks, O Lord, for times and seasons, and now for winter nights when stars shine coldly bright, for winter days when trees are stronger than the icy death and hold in blackened limbs the promise of resurrection. For opposites be praised, for heat and cold, for stillness and snow that sculptures every house and tree. We give thanks for him whose birth we celebrate in winter, so all may know that love is stronger than the coldest night, and mercy blankets all the land more surely than the snow. For joyful conversation at this festive time, we give thanks. For meals shared around a common table that are truly feasts. Joyous Lord, beyond our imagining, but not beyond our desire, we ask your blessing and we bring you our thanks. Amen. A Merry Christmas to all of you. And now back to Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Father Snyder. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Victoria Young, Chair of the Art History Department and 2019 St. Thomas Professor of the Year. Dr. Young specializes in modern American and European architecture with a special interest in sacred spaces. She also is president of the Society of Architectural Historians. She has served a critical role in curating and selecting the art for our new Iverson Center for Faith and for the sculpture that will be outside of the Center for Faith of St. Thomas Aquinas by Timothy Schmalz. I invite Dr. Young to introduce our featured speaker.
For over 25 years, renowned Canadian artist Timothy Schmalz has created large-scale sculptures now located around the world on nearly every continent, including work at the Vatican in Rome. And now we have the honor of joining this prestigious list as we get set to unveil his interpretation of our patron saint, Thomas Aquinas, outside our chapel of the same name later this month. Schmalz describes his Catholic works as visual translations of the Bible, and for Tim, and I quote him now, sculpture has the capability of creating visual bites that introduce truths in a universal language. That is the power of the language of art. His proposal to sculpt St. Thomas Aquinas stood out to our art selection committee when submissions were reviewed in the fall of 2019. In fact, we selected it for our patron saint just days before Pope Francis unveiled his work, Angels Unawares, in the piazza in front of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome on September 29th. In addition to the significance of this work, Angels Unawares is the first sculpture added to the square since the time of its creation by Gianlorenzo Bernini 400 years ago. We'd like to share with you now a short introduction to this outstanding work, Angels Unawares.
Tale scultura in bronzo e argilla raffigura un gruppo di migranti di varie culture e diversi periodi storici. Ho voluto quest'opera artistica qui, in piazza San Pietro, affinché ricordi a tutti la sfida evangelica dell'accoglienza.
What this sculpture says is that people have been moving, people have been fleeing all throughout human history. And we hope that the Church will always be in a position to accompany them. And as the Holy Father has repeatedly asked of us, to welcome them, to protect them, to promote them, and to integrate them.
Those are the faces and the eyes you can see in the sculpture, that the people are looking forward to what is ahead of them.
Showing that our Catholic faith today is alive and kicking, and that this is not a museum, but a living spiritual place.
One of my students, Maddie Olson, was there the day the piece was revealed. She wrote me that seeing Tim unveil the sculpture with Pope Francis was magical. Later, my colleague, Dr. Bernie Brady of our theology department, saw this piece. He shared this detailed photo of the young girl in the sunlight and this thought: Angels unawares. As I walked around this, I saw my mother and relatives, one with others. The sun was setting, and it shone between two colonnades, putting a spotlight on a little girl in the piece. At that moment, a tired girl with a family of tourists started crying that "I'm tired and I want to go home" cry. Wow. Another important work by Schmalz is The Homeless Jesus, which has been displayed in more than 1,000 countries around the world. We have our own version across the river in Minneapolis in front of the Basilica, so be sure and check that out. Tim's entire artistic oeuvre is extraordinary. Recently, the National Catholic Reporter titled Schmalz a modern-day Michelangelo. We are so very pleased that he is here with us today from his studio in Ontario, Canada. Let's join him there to learn more about his current projects. Welcome, Tim. Good afternoon.
Well, thank you. I am so happy to be here virtually, and I think the exciting thing is everyone can walk into my dirty studio here today. And I've been working on a huge sculpture that you can see behind me, and it's at that amazing point where it's very close to being finished. I loved seeing that video, and kind of confirming that, yes, sculptures do get finished and yes, they do get installed. This sculpture here, like a lot of the pieces that I'm working on in my studio, are right in the middle of being adjusted, redefined, rethought over, examined. But let me take you on a short little tour of my studio here. So this is one of my 3 studios here. It's a building that is kind of what I'd consider my think tank, where I start working on the most creative aspects about the sculpture. This is where I come up with the ideas, and this is where I actually execute the ideas. This studio is around 6,000 square feet. I usually work on several different pieces at one time. But this sculpture right now, like the Angels Unawares, is an epic piece that requires so much of my attention. Let me just describe the sculpture here. It's a sculpture that has the patron saint of slavery, Saint Bakita, opening up the ground and letting the oppressed, the modern day slaves, free. And so what I'm creating here is a massive 20-foot sculpture that highlights all of the modern slavery and all of its different forms today. And the fascinating thing about this is I really do think that this is doing what Pope Francis really wants. Pope Francis stated that human trafficking will always exist if it's kept underground. Well, here literally I have the oppressed, the traffic victims coming out from the ground. Having a big sculpture gives me a lot of opportunity to really kind of flesh out the truth and the narration. The idea of having, I think there's around 50 different human trafficked people in here. The idea is to show people an authentic representation of what human trafficking looks like. As you can see at the beginning, you have a child laborer carrying a big pack of bricks on her back. Right beside what you can see here is I'm working on is a child soldier. A lot of people only think that human trafficking is sex trafficked. I do have a lot of sex trafficked figures worked within this piece. However, they're not necessarily how you would presume they are. A lot of them just look like normal people. So I have various figures in here showing a reality of human trafficking. There are more slaves today than anywhere else. There's more slaves today than any other period in time in our history. And you have slaves in Africa working the mines. And so I have a lot of men. Most people think that they're only women, but around 40% of the people that are trafficked today are men. So I have the representation worked out. Here you have a domestic labor, which makes up a huge amount of the traffic victims. All these figures, the child bride, as you can see here, the beggar on the streets that is forced to beg. I'm giving a portrait, a very dark portrait. However, it is a comedy in a sense where I have Saint Bakita, who was a saint from a previous century, lifting up the ground and letting the modern day slaves free. So there is that hope. One of the interesting things before the pandemic, I was going back and forth to Rome, showing them the progress of this sculpture. And one person told me that not only do I have to have the organ trafficked, but I also have to have the babies because they sell babies on the black market. So this sculpture here is one that's my latest passion right now. I usually I get to my studio at, before 5 in the morning, sometimes as early as 4, and I start sculpting, and it's very intense. And so as I'm working, I take a break sometimes and I exercise, and what I find is that I can endure longer hours of time if I get up. There's a point where you're working that it's a good thing just to move out. Also, what you don't hear is I usually have the Bible being played as I'm sculpting, and I've been doing that for 4 years. I probably listen to the Bible more than any other person because that's part of my almost ritual as I come here, and it gets me in a state of creativity and also hopefully a spiritual state when I'm working on this piece. And so the idea of using sculpture to actually almost act as a weapon to bring attention to a lot of things that are invisible, that shouldn't be in our culture, is one of the major forces or major hopes of my work, I could say. But it doesn't usually start here. What I usually start is with little models. I'll show you. I have here the model of the Angels Unawares sculpture. And there's my second model. And this is just a plastic fiberglass cast of it that I pulled off so I could have it in my studio. The original model is in St. Paul's Basilica in Rome. But this is how I started to figure out where the people were and who they were and how I'd position it. You can see this is a lot wider. I made the life-size 20-foot version, I made a little bit more slender so I can get more figures. And I made it longer. So it's part of the work of figuring out how the piece looks, and then you start the big one. And this is really the exciting point, is when you're working on the large one. So I'm always doing models. This is like a sculpture park in one sculpture, so that's why my studio seems pretty open, as usually there's around 6 or 7 life-size pieces going on. And so, yeah, and I also have 2 other studios. This is the one I'm using right now. My other studio in China is actually obviously unavailable for me right now. But yeah.
That's
Welcome.
wonderful to see, Tim. Can you talk a little bit about the process? Because sculpture is a very heavy-duty, labor-intensive process, right? Every step along the way. So a model behind you made out of clay, eventually, will that be bronze? Is that one going to be cast in bronze too?
Yeah, it's such a big project. It is. There's so much that goes into it after I'm done the clay version of it. But what I really find is that the art or the creative aspect is what's behind me. The rest is so technical. But what essentially happens is, after I get everything basically what I perceive as perfect, then I make a mold of it. So essentially what I do is I pour rubber over top of it, and it captures all of the detail. That mold is then brought to the foundry. They pour wax in the mold, and almost like a chocolate Easter bunny, they make a hollow exact cast of the piece. And then that wax identical piece is buried in cement, and it is the wax is burnt out, and molten bronze comes in. It's really exciting. I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and I still find it fascinating seeing the live bronze being poured within the mold. And then it's chipped away, and there you have a finished bronze sculpture. But this piece behind me, like the Angels Unawares that I think you might have seen in the video, it's many pieces. All of those heads. I could go behind the sculpture right now and take off one of those heads. It's all pieced together. And I can't do it right now.
Wow,
but anyway.
Hundreds of pieces, right?
Oh, it's a jigsaw puzzle. It's insane, and I'm pushing it to the limit here. And the Angels Unawares was probably one of the most complex sculptures done in recent times, because it's 20 feet.
Yeah.
But yet every square inch of it really matters. Most large 20-foot sculptures, they're very simple. They're like a massive, colossal Buddha or a Jesus.
Right.
This, it's really dense. It's really tricky to cast, right? And so when I'm working on the piece, I'm thinking right now, and I'm really only thinking about it right now, is, how do I change this to make it easier to cast, right? So if I can move a hand just a little bit and kind of make those fingers closer to the back of one person, that's going to make an easier mold. Or just take the hand away and cast it separate. So a mold like this and a bronze sculpture like this, it's going to be probably, more than 100 pieces.
Wow.
That will be welded together. And that's the tricky part too, is you don't want to take a piece weld line right on a face, or in the center of a very delicate area. So I have to make, and you don't know this, or maybe you do, but I have to make little areas that are safe areas, as far as they're easy to fix, to clean up the welding lines on it.
Got it.
And so, yeah, it's a jigsaw puzzle. I like this part. I don't like the other part.
I have to ask you, before we start talking about the work you've done for us here, about your sculpture, and the thing I really love about it is that so much of your work, I mean, most of it that I know, is in the public realm, right? It's not in a museum. It's obviously museum worthy, and maybe some is that I don't know about, but just the ability for everyone to interact with your work, I think, is such a gift. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that purposeful for you? Does that add to what you're doing?
Yeah, I think you made a good point there. That and I've been thinking about this ever since I became a sculptor when I was 19 years old. That art galleries kind of have the opposite effect that they're actually intended for. They kind of they put the artwork in a tomb, or they make it very unapproachable or difficult to access and experience. What I do love about my Christian artwork, and this is an ambition of mine and a deep desire, is for them to be out in the public so people can approach them and experience them. Blended in with society. The perfect idea would be the homeless Jesus, which a lot of my pieces, no base required, where actually sometimes they're mistaken for real people. Yep. And so it's fascinating because I'm a Christian artist. I like to think that it's a great way of evangelizing. It's taking the Gospels and kind of blending that with our urban environments, and it's fusing the artwork and therefore the Christian message within our surrounding area. And so yeah, I love having the sculptures installed outside and becoming a part of that environment. The sculpture, Let the Oppressed Go Free, that's behind me, the cool thing about that is no base is required, and ideally it's going to be on a sidewalk where a manhole cover would be found. And so there would be that shock element to it. And what I believe is that that in order for these people that are never represented in artwork or hardly ever represented in artwork, that are kept invisible in our society, to have that shock element that kind of obstructs people's normal path to work and back, where they have to confront this piece. And by confronting this piece, they'll be reminded and become aware of those people that are human trafficked today. So artwork as a weapon, artwork as a form of evangelizing, I think is the highest part that an art piece could play, actually.
Oh, that's wonderful. So can we kind of change gears a little bit and talk about the commission here, which is so different, one single figure, as opposed to the work you've shown us today and Angels Unawares and other things. But when, we were so pleased when you agreed to take on this commission for us. As the object itself, the sculpture of St. Thomas Aquinas, will be part of a new building project we've done. It'll be right on axis with our chapel. But can you talk a little bit about what you were thinking when you heard from us, and how maybe St. Thomas Aquinas has been a part of your life?
Well, the interesting thing is the first St. Thomas Aquinas sculpture I did was one of the first commissions I ever received when I was 19 years old. Wow. I did a St. Thomas Aquinas sculpture, and it was out of cast stone. And because it was stone, I had him with a book and a feather in his other hand, a feathered pen. And it was, because it was stone, it was pretty heavy, so the feathered pen had to be relatively thick. And some people misconstrued it as a drumstick. Oh. But that was my beginning relationship with understanding the saint. And it's a beautiful piece. But it was just a very simple piece. And from that point, when I was 19 to now that I'm 51, I began to realize that artwork has to work harder for people to see it. If artwork does not work hard, it becomes invisible. And so when I thought about doing a sculpture of St. Thomas Aquinas, I didn't want to do just another typical sculpture of St. Thomas Aquinas, like the first one I did with a feathered pen and a book in his hand. I think that nowadays that doesn't work, and it doesn't capture people's imaginations. Perhaps it's because there's been so many representations of saints like that in the past that people just gloss over, they walk by them. I didn't want to just create for this amazing space something that people would just, pass on by. I wanted to get people to look at it. And in order to do that, what I'd have to do is I'd have to pull something out of my understanding about St. Thomas Aquinas. Actually, I think I just have to make a plug for Chesterton. I think one of the greatest books on Aquinas is Chesterton's book. And I read that a couple years ago, and it's always stuck in my mind how Chesterton took something that was very, very, some people say difficult, I would agree, St. Thomas Aquinas, and made it very approachable. And likewise, with my design for St. Thomas Aquinas, I wanted to make something that was approachable and interesting and exciting with this saint. And so for years I was thinking about the process. I don't know if this is legend or if there's some fact to it, but it stuck with me and I love it. In order to become a saint, you need to have 3 miracles attributed to you. So when the canonization of St. Aquinas was happening, people were wondering, well, where are the miracles? And someone piped up and said, everything he wrote was a miracle. I thought, that's a good starting point for a sculpture. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to kind of show the idea that of this ecstasy, almost like the ecstasy of St. Teresa by Bernini, have something wonderful happening. So the students on campus will actually say, wow. I wanted a wow factor. I wanted some excitement. I wanted some drama. Not what you really associate, a lot of people associate with theology or philosophy. But if I could pull that excitement into this piece by having the book that Aquinas is writing with the pages lifting up and ascending up towards heaven and actually turning into a dove.
Yeah,
And,
can we show that
Japanese
image, please,
art
the sketch?
Yeah, there's a sketch.
Yeah, let's put the sketch up. There we go. So this is what you sent us. And of course,
That was the first.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the first idea. But then what I thought about is to have the not more of an abstract dove at the tip,
Right.
just the paper folding like that Japanese.
so why don't we move to the model then, where you
Yeah.
work that out?
But
There we go. Nope.
yeah, and I wanted to. So yeah, you can see that the paper kind of form a dove. You might see it, you might not, but it's ascending. And what I wanted to represent Aquinas with is a big guy. Historically known to be a very big man. And so I researched some of the other representations that I've seen done of St. Thomas Aquinas, and he looks like a 14-year-old boy, and I really didn't want that with this sculpture here. I wanted a real beefy, hardy, intense saint here. And also I didn't want it to be really with as much detail focus as you see on here, where I'm dealing with ringlets of hair. I wanted it raw, I wanted it heavy, I wanted it kind of more like Rodin's artwork, where it's very impressionistic and very bold. And so it was interesting because that's my studio that I was the photograph where I did Aquinas. I was working on that in my Shaman studio, and it was just a beautiful time because I would be having my I was listening to the King James version during the time on repeat as I was working on this, and it was just wonderful to play with the expression of the face and getting that expression just perfect, what I felt was perfect during the time. And so it's not the best photograph that you have there, but when it's on campus, you can surely come up closer and see it. But it's a really dynamic piece that shows, in a sense, this power of his work that just floats right up. And so, yeah, after this piece, I began to think of another amazing sculpture that would come out of St. Thomas Aquinas, which could be maybe the second to this, and that's where he mentions that everything he wrote was like straw. And I thought, I gotta sometime in my life do something with that too, right?
Yeah.
But it was an amazing experience, and my hope is that people see the hardcore Aquinas and they realize that our Catholic faith is something that's hardcore. It's not cookies and cream. And Saint Thomas Aquinas in his life and in his work really shows that.
Well, and the thing I love about it is the intensity and the vibrance of it, right? It moves. And a lot of time, and your work is really good at this, but a lot of times sculpture, feels almost two-dimensional in its presentation to a user in space. And your work is nothing like that. It has such energy, but intensity. So when you're talking about, making the user work hard, making your sculpture make the user work hard, right? I think that's exactly what this piece has done with the intensity of that face and that whole language of movement in it. It's a wonderful piece.
Well, thanks. And I think that that oftentimes our faith is misrepresented by just total emphasis on the soft parts of our spirituality. And I think there's times where artwork can be just this very soft, beautiful thing, but also it's very powerful. And if you look at St. Thomas Aquinas and his work, it's amazing, and it's like I like to say it's very hardcore, and it had such an impact within our culture. I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think that he basically started the idea of the Renaissance, and it was a massive shift in our culture and how our whole Western world is today because of St. Thomas Aquinas, and I wanted to represent that with an ambassador, a visual ambassador that showed that strength, right?
Right. So on the bottom of the sculpture, if we can go back to the model, you want to talk a little bit about what he rests on, Tim? The columns?
Yeah, I have some columns. I thought instead of just doing a base on the sculpture, I didn't. Yeah, that photograph doesn't have
the
bust
head
of
in it.
Aristotle.
That's right.
I actually put them on. Yes, it's on the sketch, but that photograph I didn't finish the portrait of Aristotle. But I have on the bottom a portrait of Aristotle right at the base of it, suggesting that obviously, like the base of the sculpture, the base of some of St. Thomas Aquinas' work was his interest in Aristotle and his expression. So I had to put Aristotle in there, even though it's just ahead of him.
No, and it goes back to that notion where you're talking about the Renaissance, right? And how he starts that with, it's really a lovely tie-in. And can we go to the image of where this work will be placed on campus? So we're in process right now, Tim. And here is an image of the site. So the box you see in the middle of this garden bed is where St. Thomas Aquinas will be. And he is
beautiful.
Right on axis coming out of our chapel. He will face the chapel. And one thing, this is this new building that we've added on, the Iverson Center for Faith. And what will happen is you will come out of the chapel with him greeting you. I mean, it will be extraordinary. And we anticipate using that upper plaza for continuing services, other events. So I don't think you've seen that yet. I wanted you to see that.
No, it looks like a beautiful space.
Yep.
Thanks.
So that's going to be fantastic. Can you tell us about where our work was made and how it got to us? A little bit about, your working strategy here. Were you in China? Were you in Canada, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah, I did it in my studio in Xiamen. It's not, I know, perhaps you don't know where Xiamen is, but I'd like to say it's the Miami of China. It's tropical, it's on the ocean.
Right.
And that's where I have my huge studio, where I do some of my large pieces. And after the piece was done in the clay, the piece was cast in the process that I described. And then it was shipped over to Port Huron, Michigan, and it was waited there for a little bit, and it's being shipped off to you there.
Right.
And so it's interesting, but I do most of my bronze casting in Xiamen. I've been working with them for 10 years or so, and so I don't. The video is a little bit deceptive because I'm not always pouring my own bronzes. A piece like the one behind me, you need around 20 bronze smiths to be working on it, right? So although I'm overseeing the bronze casting, there's a lot of other people at play when it comes to casting the piece in bronze.
Right.
And so there you have some of the most skilled bronze people in the world right now. It's just absolutely fascinating, the skill set that they have on casting work, right? And so, and that's a place also that I explore different materials too. I'm right now working on mirrored stainless steel, which
Oh, wow.
the prize, I'm so shocked at this, but it lasts, if it's done properly, it lasts as long as bronze. And so that perked my interest, because I'm only interested in doing sculptures that last, to explore with that material. But yeah, so it made a long travel journey over to your campus there, but it's very exciting.
And were there any COVID-related things that impacted you being with the sculpture? Because I know you couldn't get back over to China, and any impact there for you?
No, not anything that impacted the sculpture, but right now the impact that I'm having is I'm just actually sculpting quite a bit more than I used to. I'm actually right now working on sculpting 100 cantos of the Divine Comedy.
That's right.
And it's a really cool project. I can't show you any of it right now because it's actually in the mold making stage right now. I'm actually on canto, actually I've done 75 cantos, so I'm in paradise on the project. I'd also like to do St. Thomas Aquinas, some of his work to visually interpret it. I think it would be amazing. And for me, it's one way to really understand the text. Like, say, for instance, if I took the writings of Aquinas and actually figured out, it'd take me my lifetime to do, but to figure out how to represent specific passages in sculpture, that would be stunning. But no, nothing has really upset my life at all with this. I'm usually a hermit anyway. I usually am in my studio sculpting, so the rest of the world, I know people are suffering. Other artists that don't have such solitary types of artwork are suffering, so I empathize with them. But for me, I'm kind of like what Pope Francis said. He said, either you're going to come out of this a better or a worse person, right? And I'm coming out of it with 100 cantos of the Divine Comedy under my belt, and hopefully some great sculpture.
No, that's fantastic. And, I'm not an artist, I'm an architectural historian, but I know even for me during this time, just going out and looking at buildings has really changed the way I get through the day sometimes. So I can only imagine what that's like for you. But can we talk a little bit about the work at the Vatican, Angels Unawares, and just kind of the power of that for you as an artist to do that commission? I know you've done other things in Rome, but how that when you look back on your career, how that's going to fit in to everything you've done?
Yeah, it's an amazing experience to actually have had the opportunity to do a piece to be used by Pope Francis in such a way. And I think that one of the great things about, and I've heard this before, and I've experienced it firsthand, that Pope Francis trusts people, and that responsibility on working on that piece. I felt like St. Francis, Pope Francis was in my studio behind my back watching me sculpt that sometimes. And it was interesting because I really thought that I was kind of very aware of how he would want that sculpture, though all I was given initially was the subject matter. Cardinal Czerny requested that I create a sculpture on the theme of migrants. And I said, well, I've done a lot of sculptures that would fit in there, my Matthew 25 stuff. And he said, no, we want a new original piece on specifically refugees and migrants, right? And so I came back to my studio, and I mentioned before that I obsessively listen to the Bible. And the benefit of that is you really hear some text. And this one time, it was years ago, I was in my studio, and I heard Hebrews 13:2, be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. And I must have heard it many times before because my Bible's on repeat. But this one time I heard it and I felt it. And I thought, my God, I have to do a sculpture of this. And so for a year, I was wrestling about how do I take that beautiful text, that amazing passage, and visually translate it, create a piece of artwork from it. I was playing around with ideas, and I was kind of at a stalemate on figuring out how to do it. And then after getting back from Rome with the request to come up with a design for a sculpture on refugees, it was like, bang, the sculpture. The whole sculpture just unfolded in my mind from my studio. A raft with many different figures from all migration of humanity. And in the center of this, on the raft, in the center of this crowd is an angel, but you can't see the angel. You can only see the wings. So the wings become everyone's wings. So it in a sense becomes a statement of spirituality of them all, that they're all sacred, all the people. And so I started to work on the piece, and I realized that it had to be huge. It couldn't just have, your token European, your token Asian. It had to really be a sincere representation. So it had to have more than 100 different figures in. And then when I realized that it was going to be installed in St. Peter's Square, I thought, well, there's 140 different saints around the colonnade, so I should put 140 figures within my piece. Made sense to me, right? But then other people afterwards came up to me and said, well, it's so appropriate because these were saints that were martyred, and you have the suffering of the migrants that are reflected within that. And so it was an absolutely amazing experience to work on that. I remember this one time I was working, placing a Jewish person escaping Nazi Germany during World War II, and a Muslim. And I wanted to represent them at that prominent place because I thought that's what Pope Francis would want me to do. And I thought, this is just absolutely fantastic, this idea of placing this sculpture in St. Peter's Square, because Bernini designed the colonnade as outstretched arms to welcome not only the pilgrim, but the tourist. Yep. Like, I can't believe the history there. Like, even in the 1600s, it was a place that people would go, just like we wish we could go to Rome right now. Yeah. But all walks of life. And I remember after the piece was installed, there were a group of Sikhs. There was like around 6 of them from London, England. And they came over to the sculpture, and I was still there. Wow. I was there for a couple of days. I'm not going the next day back to Canada. Yeah. And I could point out to these British Sikhs 3 different places within the sculpture that their people are represented. And then I thought about that, there's such a thing as saying you're welcome, but then an artistic welcome is something really special. And it's like even more of a welcome when you create a sculpture and place it within that space. Right. And so, it made me think a lot about the power of artwork, and especially that almost right after the piece was installed, you have the pandemic, and then you have the social unrest around the world, and you have destruction of statues. And I think it was during that time that I realized how the time for the Angels Unawares couldn't happen at a better time, because it is, I'd say, one of the most welcoming sculptures to show that all human life is sacred. And so I think that it's almost providential that piece was born into this time right now. And so a second cast of the sculpture has been made for America.
Right, it's in Boston now, right?
A second, the cast exactly the same as the Vatican is going to be installed in Washington, D.C. at the right near the National Shrine at the Catholic University of America. And before that, it is going on a cross-American tour. How amazing is that? Yeah. So I just got a photo sent today, it's just today landed in Brooklyn.
Oh,
and
good.
It'll be in Brooklyn for Christmas for 1 month, and then it sails to Atlanta, Georgia, and then down to Miami. And it's really exciting that a 20-foot, 3.5-ton sculpture is going across on tour all across America. So although people can't go to Rome, they can't go to St. Peter's Square to see the original cast, they can see the second cast of it that is traveling in various places in America.
No, that's really wonderful. And the other thing, Tim, that I like that you do is you cast small versions, right, that people can purchase. But, it's that kind of memento mori. It's that remembrance of a site that you can keep with you. And I love the way you work in multiple levels. I think that's fantastic. But we have questions from the audience, if you're ready.
Yep.
I've had a few about your artistic background. Like, how does this all happen? How do you start? Why did you become a sculptor?
Well, ever since I was 16, I loved sculpture. And it was interesting because I really did one sculpture when I was 16, and I just fell in love with the idea of doing sculpture. And I know the sculpture. I think I even have a photograph of it. But I continued to obsessively do sculpture, and then I went to Ontario College of Art, which was considered the most prestigious art school in Canada. And I only lasted there basically, it's kind of dubious whether I got kicked out or whether I just quit. But I only lasted for 3 months. And then I came back to my hometown in Elmira. And actually, this is interesting, because I got a job working in a factory, and the factory was called Park Avenue Fabrics. I'm 19 years old. I just dropped out of art school, and now I'm cutting fabric at a kind of a Canadian sweatshop. And guess where that was? In this room.
Oh, come on. Wow.
This room
That's
used to
exciting.
be a factory, and this is, when I dropped out of OCA, in this room is where I cut fabric. Those tables on the back, you can see that. You can see one there. It has a red piece of plastic
Yep.
on. Those were tables that I would cut fabric.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
That's bizarre. To me, it's very strange, because when I got the studio a couple years ago, I thought, wait a minute, this used to be Park Avenue Fabrics. And the person said, yep, and not much has changed. And I came up to this level, and really nothing has changed since I was 19, 30 years ago.
Wow.
My God.
Wow.
But I only stayed there for 3 years at the factory. And if God would have said to me there, Tim, when you're 51, you're going to be in the same room looking out the same window, I would have said, no. But then he said, wait a minute, I'm not done, but it will be your studio. It's yay! So it's a very strange life. But anyway, I quit OCA because I quit art school because what they were teaching me was stuff that it didn't really resonate with me. It was a lot of the conceptual artwork. It was kind of the idea of, and I really didn't like this, and I began to really question my idea about being an artist, because it really didn't necessarily hold much substantial value for me. It seemed like what was coveted was, if it was shocking. If it was shocking, it was good artwork. And I wanted to do something more than just play this game where the first person to do something, like a board game or something where the first person to slap this buzzer wins the prize.
Right.
And so I went through an artistic crisis, and then I went through kind of an artistic conversion. When I was around 21 years old, I rejected doing anything other than Christian artwork, because I looked at the artwork that I loved. I looked at Bernini, Michelangelo, and I realized, and I felt and I understood that in order to have an epic piece of artwork, you need an epic subject matter. And I realized that most of the artwork that really inspired me to do artwork from the beginning was Christian artwork.
Yeah.
And so, not to tell my life story, but I had a conversion experience when I was 17 years old, where I really became identified as Christian. But it took me a while. It took me like 3 or 4 years. before I realized that I could take this part of my life and my love for art and bring them together. And it was almost like, for me, as I told my old Jesuit spiritual director, Father Peter Laracy, I felt like I was invited over to dinner at someone else's house so many times, but I'd never returned the invitation. And with the artwork, I felt I returned that invitation. And I just felt so happy and so peaceful working on Christian sculptures. And at that time, I had a studio that was a fraction of this size, and I would sleep on a board. And for 4 years, I just lived in my studio and sculpted Christian saints and also representations from the Bible. And I knew from my heart that I was doing something wonderful because I felt wonderful. And so that was the beginning of it. And so one of the fascinating things now at the age of 51, I realize that I've just begun. There's so much to represent within that text, within our scripture. It's almost like there's these massive blind spots where some of these awesome ideas have not been expressed in artwork. And so my devotion is to do my best to take these gospel messages in scripture and turn them into stuff that people can read with their eyes.
No, it's wonderful, and we're so grateful, Tim, that you took on our commission, and we can't wait for it to be up. But just to wrap up here quickly, what do you want to leave us with about your work of St. Thomas Aquinas?
Well, I think that when people take a look at it, I think that it can have two messages. I think it can have a message, and hopefully people will see the power and see the intensity, and that will kind of rub off on what they think about Catholic education and St. Thomas Aquinas and the other great theologians and Christian philosophers, and that it is exciting, and that if that piece becomes an introduction to that world, I'm happy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. We're so grateful that you could be with us today and that you're completing this important work for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timothy and Victoria. That was fascinating and inspiring. And thank you, Timothy, for inviting us into your studio, former fabric factory we now know. That's the advantage of this virtual gathering, and it was such a pleasure to visit with you today. Thank you both. And as I mentioned earlier, it would not be a true alumni Christmas celebration without hearing from our talented student musicians. I know you will enjoy music from the 2019 Emmy Award-winning concert, Comfort and Joy. And the best part is you can sing along as loud as you like. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Glory to the newborn King. Glory, glory, glory to the newborn King. Children, go and tell it on the mountain, Lord, over the hills and everywhere. Why don't you go tell it on the mountain, Lord, that Jesus Christ is born. Say that no one may be go and tell it on the mountain, Lord, over the hills and everywhere. Why don't you go tell it on the mountain, Lord, that Jesus Christ is glory, 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 that Jesus Christ is glory, 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 that Jesus Christ is born. Go tell it on the mountain, Lord, over the hills and everywhere. Why don't you go tell it on the mountain, Lord, that Jesus Christ is born. Say that no one may be go and tell it on the mountain, Lord, over the hills and everywhere. Why don't you go tell it on the mountain, Lord, that Jesus Christ is glory, 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 that Jesus Christ is glory, 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 that Jesus Christ is glory, glory, glory to the newborn King. Glory, glory, glory to the newborn King. Glory, glory, glory to the newborn King. We're singing. All praise 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 to the newborn King.